I'm 54 years old, and I've spent 22 years making sure the pills that go into American bodies are exactly what the label says they are. That's not a job description. That's a purpose. My title is Director of Quality Assurance at Halcyon Pharmaceuticals, a mid-size contract manufacturer based in Dayton, Ohio. We don't make the sexy drugs. We don't have a marketing department with glossy brochures and celebrity spokespersons. What we have is a spotless FDA compliance record, an unbroken streak of clean inspections going back to 2003, and a manufacturing license that took my team 7 years of grinding, meticulous, unforgiving work to earn, and another 15 to keep. That license is worth more than the building we make the drugs in. It is, quite literally, the only reason we exist. I know every regulation in 21 CFR Parts 210 and 211 the way a pastor knows scripture. I know our standard operating procedures down to revision number. I know which auditor out of the Cincinnati district office likes to check the temperature logs first and which one goes straight to the batch records. I know because it's my job to know, and I have never once taken that responsibility lightly. The owner built this company, but I built its reputation. The owner is a good man. 71 years old, grew up in the industry the hard way, started as a lab technician and worked his way up for 30 years before putting everything he had into Halcyon. He trusted me completely. In 22 years, he never once second-guessed a compliance decision I made, even when it cost us a contract, even when it delayed a launch by 6 months, even when I had to shut down a production line on a Friday afternoon because a technician found a particulate anomaly that no one else would have caught. He understood that in this industry, the rules are not suggestions. The rules are the only thing standing between us and a patient in a hospital bed dying from a contaminated IV bag. His son had been in the building for 11 days when everything started to unravel. His son came back from Philadelphia with a Wharton MBA and a vocabulary full of words like optimization, digitization, friction reduction, and legacy bottlenecks. He was 31 years old, had never worked a single day in pharmaceutical manufacturing, and had been handed the title of Chief Operating Officer on his first Monday morning like it was a graduation gift, which, in a way, it was. I didn't dislike him personally. He was charming in the way that people who've never been told no tend to be charming. He smiled easily, shook hands firmly, remembered everyone's name. In another context, those are good qualities. In a regulated pharmaceutical facility, charm means nothing. Your FDA registration number means everything. The first week, he sat in on meetings and mostly listened. He asked smart questions about production schedules and supply chain timelines. I thought, maybe this will be fine. The owner had built something real here. Maybe his son understood that. The second week, he called me into his office. His office was already different from his father's. His father had kept a framed copy of our first FDA approval letter on the wall, the one dated February 2003, with a water stain on the corner from a roof leak we had back then. His son had taken it down. In its place was a whiteboard covered in process flow diagrams he'd apparently drawn himself, with big red circles around what he called redundant nodes. I noticed my department was one of the circled nodes. He told me he'd been reviewing the organizational structure. He said he was impressed by our compliance track record, but concerned about what he called over-centralization of regulatory knowledge. He said the company was too dependent on any one individual's institutional memory. He said this was a risk, not an asset. He used the phrase single point of failure 4 times in 20 minutes. I told him he was right, that knowledge concentration is a legitimate operational risk, and that I'd been building out my team for exactly that reason. I told him my deputy had been in quality for 9 years and was fully capable of managing routine inspections. I told him we had a succession framework in place. I told him, calmly and professionally, that what looked like centralization from the outside was actually a carefully designed accountability structure required by federal regulation. The FDA doesn't want a committee. The FDA wants a named, qualified individual who can be held legally responsible. That individual was me. That was by design. That was not a bug. He nodded like he was listening. I would later understand that he had already made his decision before I walked into the room. On a Thursday morning, 12 days after he arrived, I came into the office to find my access to our FDA Industry Systems portal had been revoked. Not expired. Revoked. Someone had gone into the FDA's Electronic Drug Establishment Registration System and removed me as the responsible person on our facility registration. In my place, they had entered his name, a man with an MBA, 0 manufacturing experience, and 11 days in a pharmaceutical facility, was now the person legally responsible to the Food and Drug Administration for everything that happened inside our walls. I stood at my desk and stared at my monitor for probably 90 seconds before I fully processed what I was looking at. Then I picked up my phone and called our regulatory attorney. She answered on the second ring. I read her exactly what was on my screen. There was a pause on her end that told me everything. She said, very carefully, that this was a significant problem. She said that the FDA requires the responsible person to be someone with direct knowledge of the manufacturing operations and the qualifications to oversee them. She said that if the agency ran a routine check, or if anything triggered a compliance review, the first thing they would find is a registered responsible person who had no manufacturing background, no relevant training records on file, and no documented qualification in our system. She said the word misrepresentation, and then she said it again. I thanked her and told her I would call her back. I walked down the hall to his office. He was on a call, feet up on the desk, laughing about something. His assistant tried to stop me. I walked past her, opened the door, and stood there. He looked at me. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "When you have a moment, we need to talk. This is not optional." Then I closed the door and waited in the hallway. He came out 4 minutes later, still smiling, carrying his coffee like we were about to have a casual Friday conversation. I asked him if he had changed the responsible person designation on our FDA registration. He said yes. He said it was part of his operational restructuring. He said he was eliminating single points of failure and that having one person control all regulatory access was exactly the kind of archaic structure he was there to fix. He said it with the confidence of someone who had just written a paper about it. I asked him if he knew what the FDA would do if they audited our registration and found that the listed responsible person had no verifiable qualifications on file and no documented training history in our QMS. He said the FDA audited every couple of years and that we just had an inspection 8 months ago. He said there was plenty of time to get everything updated. I told him the FDA can conduct an unannounced inspection at any time. I told him that 3 of our largest contracts, including the $40 million hospital network agreement we just signed in September, contained clauses requiring us to maintain current, uninterrupted FDA registration with a qualified responsible person on file. I told him that if any one of those clients ran a routine verification check on our registration status and found what I had just found, we would be in breach of contract before the end of the business day. He stopped smiling. I went back to my office and closed the door. I didn't go to his father yet. I want to be clear about that. I didn't run upstairs to the owner's office and report his son on day one. I sat at my desk and I thought through every possible path forward. I gave him the chance to fix it himself. I sent him a formal written summary of the regulatory exposure, copied our regulatory attorney, and gave him until close of business Friday to restore the registration to its correct configuration. The email was 3 paragraphs long, factual, and free of any language that could be read as emotional. I laid out the specific CFR citations, the contract breach risk, and the corrective action required. I was professional. I was precise. I gave him every opportunity to do the right thing. He forwarded the email to his assistant with a note that said to file it. On Friday morning, my deputy came to my office and closed the door behind her. She'd been monitoring our contract client portal as part of her regular duties. She told me that our hospital network client had run their quarterly compliance verification. She showed me the automated response they'd received from the FDA registration database. It flagged our facility as having an unverified responsible person qualification status. The system had generated a compliance hold notification. The client's procurement system had automatically paused our next scheduled order fulfillment, worth roughly $3.2 million, pending resolution. I read the notification twice. Then I called the owner. He picked up on the first ring. He was at his lake house, supposed to be retired, supposed to be letting his son run things. I could hear the water in the background. I told him I needed him to come in. He asked if it could wait until Monday. I said no. He heard something in my voice that 22 years of working together communicates without words. He said he'd be there by noon. While I waited, I documented everything, every timestamp, every system log entry, every email. I pulled the FDA registration change history, which shows every modification made to a facility's record, including the username of whoever made the change and the exact time it was made. I printed it. I put it in a folder. I made 2 copies and put one in my car. He was also in the building. I could hear him down the hall, on another call. completely unaware that a $3.2 million hold notification was sitting in our client's system. The owner arrived at 12:17 p.m. He came directly to my office and I showed him everything: the registration change, the qualification flag, the compliance hold, the client notification. He read through it without saying a word. His jaw was tight. I had never seen him look like that in 22 years. Not during the 2011 warning letter we fought our way out of. Not during the 2016 inspection that lasted 4 days. Not once. He asked me if his son knew about the client hold. I said not yet, as far as I knew. He asked me what the path to resolution was. I told him that restoring the responsible person designation to my name and credentials was the first step, but that the client's compliance system would need to re-verify and clear the flag, which typically took 48 to 72 hours. I told him our regulatory attorney needed to be involved immediately. I told him that depending on whether the FDA independently flagged the registration anomaly, we might need to file a voluntary disclosure. I told him what that meant for our timeline and for our reputation. He nodded slowly. He asked if I could fix it. I said yes. Then he asked what I needed. That question mattered. He didn't assume. He didn't tell me to just go do it. He asked what I needed. After 22 years, he still asked. I told him I needed 3 things. I needed my system access and responsible person designation restored immediately, with full documentation of the correction. I needed his son removed from any authority over the quality assurance department or any regulatory system access, permanently, in writing. And I needed his commitment, in writing, that no changes to regulatory personnel designations would ever be made without my written approval going forward. He was quiet for a moment. I understood what I was asking him to do. I wasn't naive about it. I was asking him to publicly constrain his own son's authority 11 days into the job. That was not a small thing for a man who had built this company to hand down to his family. He picked up his phone and called his son into the room. What happened in that office in the next 40 minutes is not something I will describe in full detail. I will say that his son argued. He used words like undermining, resistance to change, and legacy thinking. He said I was protecting my own territory. He said the company needed to evolve. He said he had a plan, and that what I was presenting as a crisis was actually a manageable transition period. His father listened to all of it. Then he put the printed documentation on the desk and pushed it across to his son, and told him to read the client hold notification. His son read it. Then the owner said, very quietly, that the $40 million hospital network contract represented 23% of the company's annual revenue, and that a full contract breach would trigger a default clause in their bank financing agreement. He said this in the same tone he might use to describe the weather: calm, factual, irrefutable. His son didn't say anything after that. By 2:30 p.m., my system access was restored. By 3 p.m., our regulatory attorney had submitted the corrected registration documentation to the FDA. By 4 p.m., she had sent a formal notification to the hospital network's compliance department with the correction reference number and a timeline for clearance. By Friday close of business, the client system showed the flag as under review rather than active hold. By Monday morning, it was cleared. The $3.2 million fulfillment was released. The $40 million contract remained intact. His son's title remained Chief Operating Officer. The owner didn't fire him. I hadn't asked him to, and I wouldn't have. That was not my decision to make. But the written agreement we reached that Friday afternoon was specific and binding. His son had no authority over quality assurance, no access to any regulatory system, and no ability to modify personnel designations of any kind without my written sign-off. Those terms were memorialized in a board resolution that our attorney drafted over the weekend. I found out later, from my deputy, that his son had spent the following Monday morning in a closed-door meeting with his father that lasted 3 hours. I don't know what was said. I know that after that meeting, his son's approach to operations changed noticeably. He started asking questions instead of making pronouncements. He started requesting briefings before making structural decisions. Whether that was genuine learning or simple self-preservation, I can't say. Maybe it doesn't matter. What I know is this. The day after the registration was corrected, I received an email from his son. It was 4 sentences. It said he had not fully understood the regulatory framework. It said he should have consulted me before making changes to systems he wasn't familiar with. It said he appreciated my professionalism in handling the situation. It said he looked forward to working together constructively going forward. I read it once. I filed it. I didn't respond. There is a particular kind of person who operates in highly regulated industries for long enough that the regulations stop feeling like restrictions and start feeling like the architecture of a building. You don't resent the load-bearing walls. You understand that without them, everything comes down. I had spent 22 years being one of those walls. Not because the owner told me to, not because the FDA required it, because I understood that somewhere there was a patient in a dialysis center or a cancer ward or a pediatric unit whose life was connected in some small way to whether I did my job correctly. That's not something you can optimize away. That's not a legacy bottleneck. That's the whole point. 3 weeks after the incident, the FDA conducted a routine registration database verification sweep. It's automated. They do it quarterly. Our facility came back clean, responsible, person verified, qualifications on file, training records current, everything exactly as it should be. The system generated a confirmation notice and sent it to our regulatory attorney and to me. I printed it out. I framed it. I put it on the wall where the original 2003 FDA approval letter used to hang, before it was taken down to make room for a whiteboard full of red circles. It's still there. I'm not the kind of person who calls himself indispensable. That word makes me uncomfortable. But I will say this. There are jobs where you can hire a smart, motivated person and have them producing real value inside of 90 days. And then there are jobs where the value is invisible until it disappears. Where the cost of getting it wrong isn't measured in a bad quarter or a missed target. Where it's measured in a warning letter from the federal government, or a contract breach, or a patient harmed by something that should never have left the building. In those jobs, experience isn't institutional memory. It's infrastructure. You can't disrupt infrastructure. You can only damage it. And when you do, you find out very quickly exactly how load-bearing it was. I still come in at 6:30 every morning. I still walk the production floor before the first shift starts. I still know every auditor's name in the Cincinnati district office. I still review every batch record that comes across my desk with the same attention I gave the first one 22 years ago. Nothing about that has changed, and nothing about that will change. Not as long as there are patients on the other end of what we make.